Hey guys, turns out I'm still sick. I lost my voice completely yesterday. My voice is not going to be very good right now. I took a couple trades today. Shorted ICCT in the threes, and then I traded BMRA here. Um, I longed it at market open at 1.43. It wasn't big size, but I'll talk about why. I thought this was a good market open long. I immediately sold it because I told my Discord, I was like, well, if we get a big push towards 170, I might be really interested in shorting this um, because of these painted lower highs. Um, and I thought the day one gapping market was getting a little weak, so I wanted to be prepared to short. As you see, I shorted the second push here. I always like waiting for the second push and shorting the second push if I think especially if there's no bids on the follow up. If and if we see other bearish price action um, on the book map. So I actually took a bunch off into these lower day cracks, but then I actually just put my risk at 166 because they had this multi-hour 165 paint, and I figured with the lower highs. Um, if it squeezes 165, it had a chance of going straight up. I was actually prepared to, if it was gonna fake breakout, short into the 170s because maybe they just fake breakout above 165 and pull it. But it just went straight up. The tape looks super strong, and I just avoided the short. And so we'll go over some stuff on the book, some stuff on the chart. Really sorry about my voice here. My voice is all messed up. Um, so pre-market action. We've been seeing these quick pre-market pops have these great runs. These have been some of my best longs of the past couple months, but I didn't see this in time. But I did think this consistent volume, and especially when you get consistent volume making a new high, making a new high, making a new high. I actually tend to think that's pretty bullish. If we go back to my notepad thing that I've been doing, right? Oh, wait a minute. That didn't work. There we go. So a bullish factor here would be increasing consistent volume, making new highs. Right, I consider that to be pretty bullish. And also, if we look at this, there was no long trap at the top. Maybe if this consolidated on VWAP and gave some type of long trap pattern into the 180s, right? Maybe I'd be very bearish that, but what we ended up getting was a controlled walk down. And controlled walkdowns on rig stocks can be very strong, where it gives some type of bullish accumulation pattern, and then it just sells straight down for 30 minutes straight with no bounce. Um, I call this a controlled walkdown, and it could be bullish. Now that doesn't necessarily mean I think it's going to break high a day. Um, I'm not saying, long at market open and hold for high day. I just consider this to be a factor. It's not a pattern, but it's a factor. Um, and then a lot of interesting things started happening on this. On this fade, there was a bunch of 40,000, 50,000 share ask pushing this down. And then they started flashing 100,000 share bids. So there's extreme level 2 games happening, and we see this in the pre-market on low float stocks, where a stock that will normally have 5 to 10, maybe 5,000 shares on the ask suddenly has 50,000, or maybe it has 3,000 shares on the bid and it suddenly has 100,000. A lot of this stuff is to control a stock and trick people into thinking certain things are going to happen. It all depends on how the stock is being controlled. Since it was being walked down, I considered these level 2 games to be very bullish, so I didn't want to take any trades. I was only going to take a trade if it made some crazy move towards highs. But if we look at the pre-market, it just went sideways. So I was like, this is going to be an interesting stock. And I took no trades in the pre-market. Now, if we look at the book, I longed this at the bottom of this wick. And the reason I did that is because there were a bunch of bids at 1.4. And I figured these level 2 games, if you look at the chart, there's lower high, lower high, lower high. So I was telling my Discord, like, they're probably going to squeeze the lower highs. Especially if they pull it back into the 140s. So I said that all my Discord right away, and that's exactly what we got. What's also really interesting about this is on the book, is that there was a bunch of bids and no ask, and they were just getting sold into. The reason I don't long these is because I've tried longing them before, but I realized that in the pre-market, usually the best longs are these pre-market pops that throw up a bid. Here's the pop, here's the bid, and here's the squeeze. These are the best longs. I tend to find that if I don't get in super early on the pre-market squeeze, that trying to long into random bids after the squeeze has already happened is usually not good. But I was like, well, maybe it's going to bounce. I was going to give this maybe at least 5, if not 10, 15 minutes to bounce off these bids. But every single time it came to these bids, it just kept selling, it just kept selling, it just kept selling. And there was really no read. And then I didn't want to chase short because my average would have been really far away from high day. So I was like, okay, I won't trade that. But here is where I went long. Here's market open. Here's the pullback. I saw this bid, I saw this bid, I saw this bid, and I instant longed at the bottom of the wick. I had like a 143, 144 average or something like that. It wasn't a lot of size, but then they had a follow-up bid. This would have been a good ad, and then it teleported. And the reason it teleported is because there's no shares on the order book. You could see that there's no shares here. The only share is at 170, which is where it pushed to, right? And then 170, 175. So as we start to move up here, there's more ask, but if we move down here, there's very little. Now the reason I full sold, again, was because I thought the low flow market was getting weaker, and also there's no bid follow up. You could see that there's no bids following this stock up, which is a bearish factor. Bearish factor. Cleared out key lower highs. That's a bearish factor. Up only squeeze. If we look at this, believe it or not, a lot of times the more aggressive the push is, the weaker the stock is. It's the same thing with ICCT. Whenever I see like big up only squeezes, if there's a low volume pullback, especially in this one where there's clearly painted higher lows, plus a lower volume pullback, these are all bearish factors, right? And I consider these aggressive 10, 20% instant squeezes past key liquidity levels to be bearish. So here, we had these lower highs get taken out. And I was like, well, I told my Discord, I was like, 170 would be great. And then we got the pullback to the 5-minute 9 VWAP, and then we got a second push, and I shorted the second push, which is this. I shorted this, and what I saw was that they threw up a bid here, but there was no bid follow-up. There was just one bidder here, and no bid follow-up. And I saw that there was a big 75,000 share ask here that got eaten through. So big ask that gets eaten through. What I'm most interested in is what's the buying looking like above the ask. And if the buying starts to slow down, which you could tell by the smaller green candles here, um, and there's no bid follow-up, I consider that bullish. So big ask that gets taken out. Minimal buying above ask level. Um, right? No bid follow-up on book map. Right. So I just shorted direct straight into here, and also I had 170 and 175 the risk off of. And then they eventually took out this 100,000 share bid, and it went straight down. So, so I just took some profits on the support crack, these higher lows. Took some profit, and then this 165 was so painted that I just decided to get out on this squeeze. And I didn't really trade this anymore. I had a pretty good day between. This was a decent trade because I made money on the long, and I made a decent amount of money on the short. I was only holding maybe like 35% going into this. And then I made a bunch of money on ICCT. So, and then I had a bunch of small trades that mostly worked on other things. But yeah, this one was interesting. A lot of times, what I'm beginning to notice is that when market makers let these like 100,000 share bids get filled, or these 80,000 share asks get filled, a lot of times the stock comes back later and does something. It's very interesting. It's very interesting how a market maker might accumulate 70,000 shares at this level at 9:45, and then 4 hours later does some type of crazy squeeze, right? I always think about that. I always think about, was that guy accumulating shares early to initiate this squeeze later, right? Because if he's buying 100,000 shares here, that means somebody's selling into him. Short sellers are selling into him. Longs are selling into him. It's kind of creating an imbalance of people selling versus the manipulator buying a ton and ton of shares, right? It's also, it goes back to this too. In the pre-market, there were tons of bids here that were all getting sold into, and this guy was just buying like 30K, 12K, 13K, 40K. There's all these big bids that the market maker allowed people to sell into. So that means this person legitimately bought like hundreds of thousands of shares at this 1.55 to 1.35 level. This person bought a lot of shares. And then at market open, we could see more bids get filled. So this guy bought even more shares. So this person who is rigging this bought a lot of shares that you saw get filled in that 130 to 150 area, and then it's squeezed later. So that's interesting. It's hard to time that though. I had long buddies trying to time this, and it's not easy. Timing the midday, late day squeezes is super difficult. Even if it's bullish, it's so hard to do um, without having, without either being super patient, having an amazing read, or having wide risk, right? So it's still not easy. But yeah, this was an interesting trade. So my voice is too shot. I cannot make an ICCT video, but I did want to make this video. So I hope that was helpful. And there's information down below for my Discord. See you guys.